Am I gifted or is it my ADHD? I'm blaming that on my ADHD. So when I was 13, I hit a rough patch in school. I could remember the exact pattern needed to complete a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, but I could not work out what on earth had just happened in the class I had to come out of, or even what day of the week it was. I started putting the most minimal amount of effort into homework and exams because I was either going to glide through with really high marks or fail completely anyway, so what was the point? How odd that Jessica failed this test. When I talked to her, she has an incredible understanding of the subject. Well, yeah, I read a long article about it once, so I can tell you in minute detail the variety of fun facts and figures, along with extrapolating the points to a broader context thanks to having read around the topic. Why did you only get 10% on this test then? Well, 5% was for remembering to write my name. You had 99% on the last test. Sure, but my favourite pen was working then. What? Have you considered it might be neurodiversity? What? This is not normal. Sometimes you just have to ask yourself, was I a gifted child or do I have ADHD? Absolutely subscribe for me catching that. Wait, you may ask, how could you mistake having ADHD for being gifted? Isn't having ADHD kind of the opposite of that? Doesn't ADHD make you unable to study properly at school? Doesn't ADHD mean that you're not smart? First of all, rude. Please stop this line and thinking at once. Secondly, no, not at all, no. There is no correlation between level of intelligence and the ability to have ADHD. And also no, you do not get over your ADHD by being smart. In fact, a recent study published by the British Journal of Clinical Psychology found that people with higher intelligence scores were likely to be diagnosed with ADHD at a later age, but they were still diagnosed. If you were to ask a random person what someone with ADHD looks like, they may think of the disruptive child running around and wreaking havoc. Probably white, probably male, probably under 12. At least that's how it still often appears in TV shows and movies. This also is often paired with jokes about ADHD being caused by bad parenting, which is a whole other issue. But this means that people only have a very particular set of tools to recognize how ADHD may affect someone's life. For instance, people often know that ADHD makes it difficult to pay attention and it causes hyperactivity. It is literally in the name. It's attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. But there are some aspects of ADHD that are less talked about or known. For instance, it is also a common ADHD symptom to not be able to see and remember whatever one is doing at any given time. If an object's not in view, it just does not exist for me. I probably have a piece of paper somewhere that tells me which classes I have each week, but I have no idea where it is. I don't remember to look for it until I actually see it, so instead I just spend my day being constantly surprised by whatever's coming next and just blindly following people I usually have classes with, except they might not actually be going to the class that we have together right then, and then I'm late for where I am meant to be. It's all very confusing. People with ADHD may also struggle identifying objects, or internalizing the passage of time. Also, hyperactivity does not have to look like a child running around and jumping on the furniture. It may look like extreme hyperfixation or hyperfocus on an activity, because if you don't hyperfocus, how are you going to get anything done? And actually, many people with ADHD are diagnosed later in life because none of the classical symptoms are detected while they're children, especially if you're female and have the inattentive type of ADHD. Hi, I'm Jessica and I have ADHD. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe if you're new. Did you think it was a little bit braggy when I told you that I didn't need to do homework to do well in a class? Well, that was just kind of a learnt behaviour, because sometimes I did put copious amounts of effort into my homework. Like building a scale model mosaic of the Roman baths out of tiny tiles, or making every single character in Room with a View out of marzipan. And that time when I was 7 and I wrote a novella from the POV of a polar bear in a zoo and his keeper. I didn't actually get very good marks. I wanted a paragraph about Roman life. I just needed a PowerPoint presentation about the characters. I didn't even ask for the zoo thing, but that's nice. I might have been a little confused about what I was meant to be doing. But I colour-coded and highlighted my planner and my folders are all in order. And I make sure to tap each of my fingers 3 times every time I sit down so that I'll stay alert, and I've worked out that if I constantly fold paper into tiny smaller pieces while my teacher's talking, then I can just about pay attention to what they're saying. Lord, why has no one had you assessed yet? Let's have a chat about school performance, ADHD, shame and masking. What does ADHD look like? Quick refresher, what is ADHD? ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder affecting both children and adults. It is described as a persistent or ongoing pattern of inattention and/or hyperactivity impulsivity that gets in the way of daily life or typical development. Individuals with ADHD may also have difficulties with maintaining attention, executive function, or the brain's ability to begin an activity, organize itself and manage tasks, and working memory. It can present generally in three forms: inattentive, hyperactive impulsive, and a mixture of the two, a kind of combined inattentive and hyperactive impulsive. I've talked about ADHD before. If you want to check out those videos, I shall leave the links in the description, and you can also find them in the card in the corner of the screen. First of all, I want to make a disclaimer that I know for many people with ADHD, this is not what their experience of school was like. ADHD is associated with poor school performance, independent from socioeconomic background factors. Don't ask me what my GCSE results look like. Common things you may hear from a teacher if you have ADHD. You're so smart, if only you did the work. You have so much potential, why are you wasting it? Don't you care at all about your schoolwork? This is one of the reasons why it's important to understand the ways ADHD presents itself. Children with ADHD are often told they are lazy, or that they don't care enough, even when they know they do want to do the work. And we often believe what other people tell us about what we're feeling, even when our true feelings are completely the opposite, particularly when we're children. The human mind truly is a mystery. So, I want to make it very clear. I am here in no way to tell you, I had ADHD and I managed, why didn't you? No, it is not you who did wrong. The school system was just not designed at all with you in mind. The school system isn't really designed with humans in mind, just empty vessels into which we can pour knowledge to be regurgitated come exam time. I mean, I don't know you as a person. You may have done wrong things, but having ADHD was definitely not one of them. I want to talk about the gifted or ADHD experience for two reasons. First of all, I want to give visibility to the different ways in which ADHD can affect how you understand yourself as a student, particularly for those who may be struggling with ADHD and may not be aware. And secondly, because I think it actually addresses an interesting question about how we think of neurodivergence in terms of internal experience versus external perception, and how, due to a fear of stigma or of being disruptive, sometimes neurodivergent people develop ways of being in the world that are designed to be of as little a bother to others as possible, to the detriment of our own mental health. This is actually one of the things that has changed in the study of ADHD and other conditions in the last decades. The aspect of attention wasn't even introduced in the diagnosis of this disorder until the 1980s. Until then, it was classified as disruptive behavior disorder. She's not disruptive in class, but I definitely have 500 thoughts a minute. Disruptive behavior disorder is really funny as a concept when you think about it. I diagnose you with being specifically annoying to be around for teachers and parents, and you should feel bad about that. A fundamental aspect of talking about neurodivergence is moving from a model that focuses on how we can make someone look less like they are neurodivergent and towards a model of how we can support the different needs of people. I have no source for this, by the way, this is my personal opinion. This is something I talked about a bit in my coming out about ADHD video, but particularly for women and girls, the focus on behavioural issues as opposed to perception of internal distress and actual impairment leads to larger numbers of unidentified and undiagnosed cases, with implications for long-term social, educational and mental health outcomes. According to a 2020 meeting of experts from the United Kingdom ADHD Partnership, early meta-analysis of gender effects have found lower severity of hyperactivity, impulsivity, or all ADHD symptoms, inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, in girls and boys, although individual studies show more mixed results. Although much of the scientific literature indicates an overlap in the clinical presentation of males and females with ADHD, the available evidence often draws on predominantly male samples due to the higher prevalence of ADHD in males. But also, hyperactive impulsive symptoms have been linked to higher clinic ascertainment rates and may be more commonly seen in boys with inattention symptoms being less obvious and therefore less likely to be detected. These differences may lead to the perception that females with ADHD are less impaired. People may experience and respond to the same behaviour of males and females in different ways due to gender-related behavioural expectations. So whilst girls may have more of a tendency to inattentive ADHD traits, we don't really diagnose girls enough to know. Despite the higher prevalence of ADHD found in children perceived as boys versus girls in child and adolescent populations, adult samples tend to be more balanced across genders. Thomas Brown suggests in a new understanding of ADHD in children and adults that this may be due to adult women being more likely to seek a diagnosis for themselves, whereas in children, boys are referred for clinical diagnosis by their parents, more commonly in ranges of 3:1 to 16:1. Also, just a reminder that these are general trends and people experience both their gender and the way ADHD impacts their lives in multiple ways. Just because you did not experience boy ADHD or girl ADHD, it doesn't mean your gender identity or your experience of ADHD is less real. Shout out to girls who like to be out throwing mud at trees and to indoor boys having tea parties. Plot twist, I have the hyperactivity kind of ADHD, thank you very much. I just also have a chronic illness that makes me really tired all the time. Gender is not a zodiac sign. ADHD, performing, and school. How does this play out in terms of school performance when you're a child? Often when you have ADHD, the school system isn't really designed for you, so you have to find a way of learning to take a class. Or rather, learning to appear like you are taking the class. If you're not the kind of person who can just quietly listen without actively engaging or responding, as is the case for many people with ADHD, you may have to put all of your energy into sitting still or not talking or looking like you're paying attention to the teacher. Sadly, this also means sometimes you're putting so much effort into looking like you're paying attention and into making sure you are presenting all the things you are supposed to present that you don't have time or mental space to learn the actual subject that you're being taught right now. Or the parts you're not hyper-focused on anyway. But why would you not just tell your teachers or parents that you need more support as opposed to becoming your own teacher? You know this is a rhetorical question. You know that class teaching is often designed in order to go through the curriculum and make sure kids can prove they have acquired knowledge in a standardised manner. A lot of schools are not good at giving space for alternative forms of learning. I once got in trouble for reading a book in class. But you gave me this book. You're too far ahead. I've already read it 3 times now, plus the spark notes in the back. Trust me when I say I understand the material. I'm just bored out of my mind. The class structure doesn't always encourage as much direct engagement or questioning of the material to support the kind of student who requires constant interaction to remain engaged. Will I answer every single question the teacher asks? Yes. Why is she asking questions if she doesn't want us to provide answers? How am I supposed to stay focused if I'm not actively engaged in the conversation? Cat just walked past the window. Please, someone, make her stop engaging with the class. Make her stop talking. They're great questions, but they're not on the syllabus, and I do not have time for this. Not everyone needs to talk as much as me. And some with ADHD have a fear of over-interacting, although this is not just an ADHD trait, obviously. A 2010 study has shown that already at primary school age, children perceive seeking help as a sign of incompetence and may feel deep shame or embarrassment about asking for support. This means carers are likely to underestimate the need for help of small children who struggle with school tasks. On top of that, children who are perceived as neurodivergent are at higher risks of stigma, victimization, and bullying by their peers, though it has been proved that educating students about neurodiversity reduces these negative effects. Yes, teach the children, teach them about everything. That is how we combat stigma or discrimination. Teach them about it. It is no wonder then that children and teens would develop alternative systems and coping mechanisms that allow them to keep the appearance of having an okay time, while then trying to slip under the radar all the work they do to keep up with their peers. Having to find one's own way of performing learning is not an experience unique to people with ADHD. Some people with dyslexia, for instance, also describe their learning to read in similar terms, as something they had to do on their own in a way that made sense to their own brain. Because they may not be able to tell apart the different letters of a word easily, eventually some just learn to memorize the shape of every word and how they're spelt, and that's why they can only read words they already know. And that way, whoever is trying to teach you to read feels like they've done their job. Everybody is happy. At least the person trying to teach you to read. That was very much my experience. Everyone thought I was such a good student, but I wasn't learning from the teachers. I was teaching myself everything I was pretending to learn. I had to read through all of the textbooks before every single class, sit there pretending that yes, I'm learning this for the first time right now. For instance, I studied French for literal years. I can't do French at all. It makes no sense to me. But I practiced how to do my GCSE French exam like a visual puzzle. So we knew beforehand what the subject of the written exam was, a question posed to us in French. So I asked my mother, who speaks French, yes, she speaks multiple languages and I can't, to help me write out the answer beforehand. Then I memorized each of her paragraphs, tying it to one word of the written question, which I knew would be taped to the table in the exam. So when I sat down in the exam room, I looked at that typed question, broke it down word by word, and spat out each corresponding paragraph onto the page. Absolutely no idea what I was writing, but I got a B. So I guess I taught myself how to pass the written part of the French GCSE, which I'm sure is a very useful skill to have in the future, and the people in France will be very impressed by. Like a swan, I was gliding beautifully over the water, swimming manically under the surface. And this is what we call masking. I guess swans can be the official mascot now, masking, yeah. You may have heard this term more commonly in the context of autism, but masking refers generally to mimicking the behaviour of neurotypical people in order to be socially accepted, and it is very much a thing people with ADHD also do. Because many of us are raised to think it is acceptable to be seen to struggle or to not be, quote, end quote, normal. When I was writing this video, I looked for what are examples of masking for ADHD, and you have some like stimming, which are repetitive motions that soothe you, like knitting or rocking back and forth or fiddling with a pen. But there was a list for masking inattentive ADHD that included the following: coming up with excuses for being late or distracted without harmful intentions, putting in twice the amount of effort and time than others to achieve a goal, working extra hard to complete tasks right before the deadline, checking your work multiple times before submitting, focusing intensively during conversations to keep up, being extra early to events to avoid being late, having multiple alarms and reminders set up, writing everything down. Look, I do not do all of these things anymore. But I feel my childhood self did not need to be called out this hard by the Attention Deficit Association, thank you. You know when you do something and you hide it because it feels shameful and like no one else should ever find out, and then you realise it's actually so common in your peer group that it's every element of a listicle? Good news, you thought you had a shameful secret, but you just had ADHD. Also be aware stimming may be used in order to mask, but suppressing the need to stim can also be a form of masking. Other forms of masking hyperactive ADHD may include bottling up your energy or staying quiet during conversations to avoid cutting people off. Good luck with that! Masking can look like opposite behaviours too. The reason masking is harmful is not what the action is itself, but rather that you are putting a lot of energy into performing not having an issue and into making people think that you do not need support. Obviously, it is a good thing to take notes or set an alarm or remind yourself of events or deadlines. The mental load from masking comes not from the action itself, but in part from the sense that one is unacceptable if one seems to struggle. Masking can not only delay the diagnosis of ADHD, but it also leads to burnout, anxiety, and depression. It does make sense for some people who have this sort of experience of pretending that they are learning at school to not fully realise how much ADHD impacts their lives till they're older. Often, as a child, ideally at least, you do not have to worry about things like what you're going to eat, how you're going to pay rent, or how you're going to get a sustainable source of income. These are all things that take a lot of mental space. Have you ever seen that viral comic about the mental load and how it creates unequal relationships? It's a comic about how planning for everyday life and accounting for your needs and those of those around you just takes a lot of time and energy. So if you wait for your partner to tell you what to do around the house, you're putting all the work of logistics and detail planning onto them, and also often actual physical work. When you're a child, the mental load of all of these things is carried by your parents. And so as work at school or university becomes more challenging, or as you start having to work and keep yourself alive as an adult, you may suddenly become more aware of all the effort you were already putting in and pretending that you were not struggling in the first place. Or you may feel like you're suddenly not as smart or as capable, because even though you were able to work well at school, you find that your executive dysfunction increases. You're getting acceptable results, but the issue is not the output, the issue is the distress you're experiencing in order to get to it. And sometimes other people and yourself don't notice that there is an issue that needs to be addressed at all, until you're not able to put up a front about it anymore. In the words of Thomas Brown, impairments of executive function associated with ADHD are often noticed first in school because academic and behavioural requirements of the classroom are difficult for many children with ADHD to meet in an age-appropriate way. Some with ADHD manage to meet these requirements quite adequately during the early years of school, but later find their executive functions significantly interfere with the increasing demands for self-management and more complex learning and academic output in upper grades, especially during secondary and post-secondary education. However, studies of adolescents and adults with ADHD indicate that long after school years, many continue to have significant problems in their work, social relationships, sleep, family life, household management, driving, and many other aspects of daily life. My God, I wish I could drive. Because you are not using your schooling experience to learn, but rather you are employing your time to make sure others think you are good at school. A conclusion: children and development. So, how can we prevent children from being ashamed of needing support? First of all, we need to stop shaming them. Children's brains work in different ways and progress at different speeds in different areas of knowledge and ability. Sometimes, like in the example about dyslexia before, if we spend enough time trying a method that does not work, children will have to use a part of that brain power identifying alternative ways of making it make sense. It's also a fact that ability and age do not map neatly for all children. Grouping children together according to age has made this more evident to the children themselves, who will be comparing their progress to that of their peers. What is this thinking that children born between these 12 months will be at a similar stage of development? The ones in the middle months? Maybe. The ones at the extreme ends, surely they have more in common with the year above or below. And what about the children who are just developing a little slower or faster than the average for that age group? Is age really more of a determining factor than aptitude? Some of the kids in my class could have done this work 2 years ago. Now they're too bored. Some of the kids still struggle even to read, and they're being completely left behind because the school tells me just to teach the middle. This has not always been the case. Until not that long ago, people often didn't even know what age they were, and schoolrooms were just mixed age children. They're all children. Birthday cards were invented in the 19th century in order to not waste unused Christmas cards. So the birthday card lobby is to blame. We are now used to dividing children according to age groups at school and other activities. But this is a relatively new development that has emerged with modern schooling, and it was not commonly done before the mid-1900s. According to the Commodification of Childhood by Daniel Thomas Cook, in the late 18th century, some colleges in colonial New England had attendees with ages ranging all the way between 8 and 25 years old. This is still the case in some rural schools, with few pupils, and schools where having a mixed age group is specifically part of the education environment, like a Montessori school. But otherwise, this model has generally been dropped. Even though we do not have statistically significant results to back it up, several studies have shown neutral to positive effects in grouping children of different ages together. Whilst some parents may be concerned that being in a mixed age group may negatively impact older children, generally, they can actually benefit from mentoring and supporting the learning of younger or less developed students. However, it is not so much the structure of the class, but the type of learning that really makes a difference. Learning should be active, collaborative, interactive, and involving the children, and it should give children space to experiment and find out what works better for them at an individual level and within a group. Talking! Being able to talk! Because children do not all need to have the same level of ability or the same level of progress to be able to benefit from participatory group activity or even from watching others work. And because it is fundamental that children feel like they do not have to burn themselves out in order to serve an external goal. Learning should be about learning. And they do not always get to feel that. While I was writing the script, I was talking to someone about how everyone thought I was a good student when I was in school, but it was not true. I was only pretending to be a good student, but I wasn't actually learning. And they said, "But you were a good student. You got good grades. You learnt your subject. You were top of the class. You never complained." And that is true. But I was saying I wasn't a good student because I got to those results a different way from how I was told I was supposed to get there, and because I had to put a lot of effort into the parts of studying that felt like they should have been easy. I felt like I was failing at taking the class. I have to drop maths because I can give you the correct answer to the question, but I'll never be able to show you how I got the workings out. I don't know how I got there. My brain just kind of spat the answer at me. We're not really on speaking terms, my brain and I. Surely shouldn't the class be for the sake of the child and not the other way around? It is a bit ironic that I thought, let's write a nice uplifting video about ADHD, but I failed to give myself that positive reinforcement. It's also a bit ironic that the question was, are you a gifted child or did you just pretend to do well at school, even though you were doing well at school? Imposter syndrome is real. Because frankly, I was putting a lot of effort into making people believe that I was able to take the class and learn in the way in which they thought I should be learning. And at the same time, I was teaching myself all of the subjects in a way that made sense to my brain. This is like 2 full-time jobs at the same time. But children should not have to have 2 full-time jobs. Children should not feel like they are faulty for not being able to derive a benefit from an experience that is painful. There's this story I read a few years ago about Dame Gillian Lynne, who was a ballet dancer and choreographer for Broadway shows like Cats and Phantom of the Opera. She describes how when she was in school in the 1930s, her teachers were very concerned that she had a learning disorder because she had a terrible attention span and could not stay put in her seat. This was in the 1930s, so she was obviously not diagnosed with ADHD, but her teachers told her parents to take her to a specialist, and this man suggested to her mother that she should join a dance school, which, considering what most specialists said to do with potentially disabled children in the 1930s, shows he was clearly one of the good ones. She says, we walked into this room and it was full of people like me, people who couldn't sit still, people who had to move to think. I'm not going to join a dance school, obviously, but I just think that is a beautiful example of how sometimes giving a person an environment that makes sense for them makes all of the difference. We started using labels like gifted, not because we think some children are better than others. I mean, some people clearly think this, but those people should really reconsider their approach to life. Who goes out there ranking children? Stop doing that. You do it. You're literally a teacher. I use good job stickers. But rather because we developed an understanding that people learn in different ways and that the teaching models that work for one child may not always have the best results for another child who experiences the world in a different way. Side note, there is of course the argument that gifted is just neurodivergence in itself. Not everyone is going to get the optimal learning experience from a particular school system, and some people could get much better results if the structures around them were supporting the ways in which they learn. But some children may learn to perform that they are benefiting from those structures because they feel they have to prove they're good enough for them, and this only makes it harder for them as they grow up to believe that they are able to receive support from structures around them because they learn it is their job to prove they are capable, not the job of the school to find the way to teach them that makes sense to their brains. And you should not put all of your energies in pretending nothing is wrong when you could be getting help to actually make you feel better. To all those gifted and talented children and ex-children out there, maybe growing up you heard those labels a lot and had people expecting big things from you, but in reality lived with an unspoken struggle. You're not alone. Undiagnosed ADHD is something many gifted people deal with, and it doesn't take away from your intelligence or your worth. In fact, it often means that your mind operates in ways that others don't understand, and that makes it no less valuable. So if you've been hard on yourself for missing deadlines, for struggling with organisation, or for needing extra time to finish things, remember that you're not falling short. You're just managing unique challenges that are as real and as valid as any physical barrier. You still have gifts. You will still accomplish. You do not need to fit into anyone else's mold, but the one that is uniquely yours. Your journey isn't defined by anyone else's expectations. You're not alone, you're not broken, and you're not failing because life doesn't feel effortless. Know that you have a place in this world exactly as you are. You're not only going to be okay, you're going to make a difference. Let me know in the comments below what other ADHD related videos you would like me to make, and I will see you in my next video.